Strange things started happening at Sunny Pines care home. First, Betty's gold necklace disappeared. Then Frank's war medals. Now my 60-year wedding ring. Someone is robbing us, and this old lady won't stand for it. My name is Gloria Patterson. I'm 79 years old, and I've been at Sunny Pines for almost 3 years now. After Harold passed away, our house became too much for me to handle alone. My son Derek insisted I'd be safer here. Safer, he said. Ironic, isn't it? I first noticed something was wrong when Betty Simmons started crying during our weekly bingo game. Her gold locket, the one with pictures of her late husband and daughter, had vanished from her nightstand. The staff suggested she might have misplaced it. At 82, with mild dementia, Betty accepted this explanation, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. 2 weeks later, Frank Kowalski discovered his World War II medals were missing from the display case in his room. Frank served in the Pacific and received those medals for bravery. He's 93 now, but the fire in his eyes when he talked about the theft made him look 20 years younger. Again, the staff chalked it up to forgetfulness. Maybe he moved them while cleaning. Perhaps a family member took them home for safekeeping. I knew better. Someone was targeting our treasures. Not just any items, but the ones with sentimental value that couldn't be replaced. I kept my suspicions to myself and started paying closer attention. I've always been observant. Harold used to say I should have been a detective instead of a school librarian. Gloria, he'd joke, you notice everything, except when I track mud on your clean floors. I began keeping a journal, noting who entered which rooms and when. The staff follow regular schedules for medication, cleaning, and check-ins. Visitors sign in and out. Nothing seemed unusual until last Tuesday when I returned from physical therapy to find my wedding ring missing. I kept it in a small blue velvet box on my dresser. Harold placed that ring on my finger 60 years ago, and I only took it off last year when my arthritis made it too painful to wear. That ring survived 6 decades of dishwashing, gardening, and all of life's messiness. It witnessed the birth of our children, our grandchildren, our fights, our makeups, our entire life together. When I reported it missing, Nurse Patty gave me the same patronizing smile they gave Betty and Frank. Gloria, honey, are you sure you didn't put it somewhere else for safekeeping? Maybe in your jewelry box or bathroom drawer? Director Bennett was even worse. He sat behind his desk, fingers steepled under his chin, and suggested that sometimes at our age we forget things. As if I'd forget where I put the most precious item I own. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. If the staff wouldn't believe us, we'd have to solve this mystery ourselves. I recruited Mabel Washington from the East Wing. She was a legal secretary for 40 years and has a mind sharp as a tack. Then I convinced Frank to join us. Despite his walker and oxygen tank, his military strategy experience could be useful. Finally, I brought in Herb Goldstein, who can barely hear, but spent 50 years as a locksmith and knows everything about security. What none of us realized was that our little investigation would uncover secrets far darker than missing jewelry, secrets that someone at Sunny Pines would kill to protect. We met in the sunroom during afternoon recreation time, huddled around a table pretending to play canasta. The staff barely glanced our way, just another group of seniors passing the time with cards. We need evidence, Mabel whispered, shuffling cards with hands gnarled by arthritis, but still surprisingly deft. Without proof, they'll keep dismissing us as confused old folks. I can make a list of everyone who has access to our rooms, Frank offered, his bushy white eyebrows furrowing in concentration. Herb adjusted his hearing aid. What about checking the pawn shops nearby? If someone's stealing valuables, they might be selling them. Good thinking, I said. But how do we get there? None of us can drive anymore. We all fell silent, contemplating this obstacle, when a new voice joined our conversation. I couldn't help overhearing. Perhaps I could help? We looked up to see Iris Chen, who had moved in just last month. I didn't know much about her except that she was 75, always impeccably dressed, and kept to herself. I still have my driver's license, Iris continued with a slight smile, and I'm rather curious about these thefts myself. The next morning, Iris drove Mabel and I to 3 different pawn shops in her pristine blue Buick. Frank and Herb stayed behind to keep watch and create a detailed map of Sunny Pines, marking potential hiding spots and blind spots in the security cameras. Iris surprised me. For someone who barely spoke during communal meals, she transformed behind the wheel, confident and sharp-eyed. When we reached Golden Opportunity Pawn, the first shop on our list, she leaned over and whispered, "Let me do the talking. I have experience with this sort of thing." Before I could ask what this sort of thing meant, she was already charming the middle-aged man behind the counter. She introduced herself as a jewelry collector looking for vintage pieces for her niece's wedding. Specifically, Iris said, pulling out her phone to show photos we'd taken of our missing items, "I'm looking for pieces similar to these. Have you seen anything like them come through recently?" The man barely glanced at the photos. "Sorry, ma'am, can't help you." Mabel nudged me. Something wasn't right. His eyes had flickered with recognition before he dismissed us. The second pawn shop yielded similar results, quick denials and an eagerness to see us leave. By the third shop, my arthritic knees were aching and my patience was wearing thin. "This isn't working," I muttered as we left the third shop empty-handed. "On the contrary," Iris said, her voice calm as she unlocked her car. "What do you mean?" Mabel asked, lowering herself carefully into the back seat. "Did you notice how quickly they dismissed us? No genuine shopkeeper would turn away potential customers without really looking at what we were showing them." Iris started the engine. "They recognize those items. They're just not willing to admit it." On the drive back, Iris revealed that before retiring, she'd worked as an insurance fraud investigator. People underestimate the elderly. They think we're all just waiting to buy, lost in our memories. It makes us invisible, and that can be our greatest advantage. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Iris had said about being invisible. Then it hit me, the perfect way to catch our thief in action. But as I was jotting down my plan, I heard a crash and a muffled cry coming from Frank's room across the hall. I rushed to Frank's room as fast as my arthritic legs would carry me, which isn't very fast at all. The door was ajar, and when I pushed it open, I found Frank on the floor beside his overturned walker. "Frank, are you all right?" I helped him to a sitting position, checking for injuries. I'm fine, he grumbled, embarrassed. "Just took a tumble." "But Gloria, someone was in here. I woke up and saw a shadow by my dresser." I glanced around. Nothing seemed disturbed. "Did you recognize who it was?" "Too dark, but they ran when I called out." Frank's breathing was labored from the fall. "They went that way," he pointed toward the staff wing. After getting Frank settled back in bed, I returned to my room and called Mabel on the ancient landline phones each room has for emergencies. "We need to accelerate our plan," I told her. "The thief knows we're onto them." The next morning, our detective squad gathered in Herb's room. His roommate was at dialysis, giving us privacy. I think we need to set a trap, I explained, outlining my plan. We need bait, something valuable that would tempt our thief. I have my mother's pearl earrings, Mabel offered. They're not worth much money, but they look expensive. Perfect. Now we need a way to catch them in the act. Herb cleared his throat. Back in my day, we used something called theft detection powder. It's invisible until it gets on someone's hands. Then it shows up under ultraviolet light. Where on earth would we get something like that now? Mabel asked. Iris smiled mysteriously. Leave that to me. 2 days later, Iris returned from an outing with a small bottle. It's not professional grade, but it should work. My grandson uses it at college parties to stamp hands, completely invisible until under blacklight. And the blacklight? I asked. She pulled a small UV flashlight from her purse. Amazon Prime. My daughter set it up for me. That evening, we prepared our trap. We placed Mabel's pearl earrings in a decorative box on her dresser, conspicuous but not too obvious. We carefully dusted the box and earrings with the UV powder. Then we took turns watching from Herb's room across the hall, which had a clear view of Mabel's door. For 2 nights, nothing happened. On the 3rd night, it was my shift from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. My eyelids were growing heavy around 3:30 when I noticed a figure in scrubs approaching Mabel's door. They looked both ways, then slipped inside using a key. I nudged Herb awake and called Iris and Frank on the emergency phones. Then I grabbed the UV flashlight and shuffled across the hall as quickly as I could. When I opened Mabel's door, the light flicked on, revealing Nurse Kevin frozen by the dresser, the jewelry box in his hands. "Gloria!" He looked startled. "Mrs. Washington isn't feeling well, so I'm just checking on her medications." Mabel sat up in bed. "I feel fine, young man, and my medication is in the bathroom cabinet, not my jewelry box." By then, Iris, Frank, and Herb had arrived. Frank was recording everything on Iris's smartphone. "We know about the pawn shops, Kevin," I said calmly. "Put down the box." Kevin's face hardened. He set down the box and moved toward the door, but Iris blocked his way. "I wouldn't," she said coldly. "Director Bennett has already been called." What happened next happened so quickly that my old eyes could barely follow. Kevin shoved Iris aside and bolted for the door. As he pushed past me, I remembered the UV powder and managed to grab his wrist. "You're not going anywhere until we check your hands," I said, surprisingly steady. As I turned on the UV flashlight, none of us expected to find not only the telltale glow on Kevin's hands, but also something much more sinister hidden in his pocket. Director Bennett arrived with security, looking annoyed at being called at 4 a.m., until he saw what was happening. When the UV light revealed the powder on Kevin's hands, the nurse's demeanor changed completely. "You don't understand," Kevin said, his voice cracking. "I needed the money. My sister's sick and the insurance won't cover her treatment." "So you steal from the elderly?" Bennett's voice was cold. "From people who have so little left?" While they were talking, I noticed something strange in Kevin's pocket, a faint glow under the UV light. I pointed it out to Iris, who moved with surprising speed for her age. "What's in your pocket, Kevin?" she demanded. Reluctantly, he pulled out a small pill bottle without a label. Under the UV light, some residue on the outside glowed bright blue. Our powder had transferred there, too. "What is that?" Bennett asked sharply. Kevin went pale. "Just some aspirin." Iris snatched the bottle and opened it. "These aren't aspirin." She showed the pills to Bennett, whose expression turned grave. "Those are oxycodone," Bennett said. "Prescription narcotics." Suddenly, the thefts seemed secondary to a much bigger problem. Bennett called the police, who arrived within minutes. As they led Kevin away,
Detective Wilson stayed behind to take our statements. "I'm impressed," Wilson said, looking at our little old elderly sleuths. "Most people half your age wouldn't have put this together." "Never underestimate old people in a place where there's nothing to do but observe," I replied. After the excitement died down, Director Bennett gathered all residents for an announcement. Kevin had been stealing prescription medications from residents and selling them. The jewelry thefts were just a side business. The police found Betty's locket and several other stolen items in Kevin's apartment, though my wedding ring wasn't among them. "I want to personally apologize," Bennett said, looking genuinely remorseful. "We failed in our duty to protect you. We're implementing new security measures immediately." That afternoon, our detective squad reconvened in the sunroom. "Well, case closed," Herb said, adjusting his hearing aid. "Though I'm sorry about your ring, Gloria." I nodded, trying not to show my disappointment. That ring was irreplaceable. "I'm not convinced the case is closed," Iris said quietly. "Kevin confessed to the medication theft and some of the jewelry, but he insisted he never took your ring, Gloria." "He's probably lying," Mabel suggested. "Maybe, but what if he's not?" Iris leaned forward. "What if there's a second thief?" Frank nodded slowly. "During my night shifts in Korea, we'd sometimes catch one enemy soldier deliberately making noise to distract us from others sneaking through another area." "You think Kevin was a distraction?" I asked. "I think it's worth considering," Iris replied. "The medication theft was systematic and ongoing, but the jewelry thefts targeted specific, sentimental items." She had a point. Betty's locket contained family photos. Frank's medals represented his service. My ring symbolized my marriage. These weren't just valuable items. They were pieces of our identities, our histories. "So who would target such personal items?" Mabel wondered. "Someone who knows us," I said slowly. "Someone who knows what these items mean to us." A chill ran through the room as we realized the implications. If Iris was right, then someone close to us, someone we trusted, was violating us in the most personal way possible. As we pondered this disturbing thought, Nancy from the front desk approached our table. "Gloria, your son Derek is here to see you. He said it's urgent." Little did I know that his visit would reveal a connection to our mystery that would shake me to my core. Derek rarely visited on weekdays. As a financial advisor with a busy practice, he usually came on Sunday afternoons, precisely between 2 and 4 p.m. So his unexpected Wednesday appearance immediately put me on alert. I found him pacing in the visitor's lounge, checking his watch impatiently. At 45, my son had his father's height and my stubbornness, though his hairline was receding faster than Harold's had. "Mom," he said, kissing my cheek perfunctorily. "I came as soon as I heard about the incident. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I assured him. It was exciting, actually, like being in one of those crime shows you watch. Derek didn't smile. "This isn't a TV show, Mom. You could have been hurt confronting that nurse." "We outnumbered him 4-1, I pointed out, and none of us tried to be heroes. We called the director right away." He sighed, that familiar sigh that meant, "My mother is being difficult." "That's not the point. You should have reported the thefts and let the staff handle it." "We did report them. They dismissed us as confused old people." Derek ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Well, at least they caught the guy. Did they recover your ring?" "No," I said, watching his reaction carefully. "They found Betty's locket and some other items, but not my ring." Was it my imagination, or did a flicker of relief cross his face? "That's too bad," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "But it was just a thing, right? The important memories are in your heart." Just a thing? That ring was the symbol of the most important relationship in my life. Derek knew that. Something felt off. "Actually, I've been thinking about the ring a lot. You know, your father bought it at Tiffany's. It must be worth quite a bit now, especially with gold prices so high." Derek shifted in his seat.
I wouldn't know about that. I was thinking of having it appraised for insurance purposes. Do you think $10,000 would be a fair estimate? His eyes widened slightly. That much? I mean, Dad wouldn't have spent that much back then. Of course not, but antique jewelry appreciates. I was making this up entirely, but Derek didn't need to know that. The police asked if I had it insured for their investigation. Derek checked his watch again. Look, Mom, I need to get going. Client meeting. I'm glad you're okay, and I hope they find your ring, but don't get your hopes up. After he left, I rejoined my fellow detectives and shared my suspicions. Your own son? Mabel looked shocked. I don't want to believe it, I admitted, but he's been pressing me to add him to my accounts for simplicity. And last month he suggested I sell my house instead of keeping it rented out. Frank frowned. Financial problems? Possibly. His wife Lisa always wants the newest and best of everything. Private schools for the kids, luxury vacations, a boat they barely use. Iris was thoughtful. We need more information. What does Derek do for work exactly? He's a financial advisor, has his own small firm. Perfect, Iris said. I have a friend, my former colleague from the insurance company. He could look into Derek's business discreetly. 2 days later, Iris called us to her room. Her friend had discovered something troubling. Derek's firm was under investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission for potential mismanagement of client funds. If he's in financial trouble, valuable items that could be sold without raising suspicions would be tempting. But how would he get into our rooms, Herb asked. He doesn't have keys. He's my emergency contact, I said quietly. And Betty's, too. We have the same doctor, and Betty doesn't have close family. Derek offered to help her with medical decisions. And Frank? Frank's bushy eyebrows shot up. He approached me about veterans benefits last year, said he could help maximize my payments. I gave him copies of my discharge papers and medal citation for the application. We all fell silent as the pieces clicked into place. Derek had access, motive, and opportunity. But I needed proof before accusing my own son. That's when Herb, who had been quietly tinkering with something, spoke up. I think I know how we can catch him in the act. He held up what looked like an ordinary alarm clock. I made a few modifications. It has a tiny camera inside that activates with motion. My nephew got me the parts. He's into that computer stuff. We decided to set another trap. This time, I would tell Derek that I had found my original wedding ring. It had been misplaced, not stolen. But I also had a very valuable diamond brooch that belonged to my grandmother, another complete fabrication, that I kept hidden in my room. As Herb installed his modified clock on my dresser, I felt a mix of determination and heartbreak. Was I really about to try to catch my own son stealing from me? What I didn't know then was that our trap would catch someone far more dangerous than I could have imagined.
I called Derek the next day and told him about finding my misplaced wedding ring and mentioned the valuable brooch, suggesting he might want to get it appraised for insurance purposes. He seemed distracted, but said he'd stop by on Friday after work. Our trap was set. Herb's modified clock was positioned on my dresser with a clear view of the room. For the bait, we borrowed a costume jewelry brooch from the Sunny Pines Drama Club's prop collection, dusted it with UV powder, and placed it in my jewelry box. Friday came and Derek arrived at his scheduled time. We had our afternoon visit in the common room where he was oddly interested in my medication schedule and when I would be at physical therapy. I pretended not to notice and mentioned that I'd be at a special extended therapy session on Monday morning. The therapist thinks my hip is improving, I told him. They want to try some new exercises that take about 2 hours. That's great, Mom, Derek said, finally meeting my eyes. You deserve to get the best care. Over the weekend, our detective squad finalized the plan.
I would go to my regular therapy session on Monday, but instead of staying for 2 hours, I would return early with Iris. The others would keep watch from strategic positions around the floor. Monday morning arrived and everything proceeded according to plan. I went to physical therapy, and exactly 30 minutes later, Iris picked me up in her wheelchair, borrowed from another resident. We returned to Sunny Pines through the service entrance to avoid being seen. As we approached my hall, Frank signaled from his position by the vending machines. Someone had entered my room. Herb was monitoring his camera feed on a tablet his nephew had provided, confirming there was movement inside. Mabel joined us, and together we moved toward my door. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might give out right there. What would I say to Derek when we caught him? I took a deep breath and opened my door. The figure rifling through my dresser wasn't Derek. It was Lisa, my daughter-in-law. She froze when she saw us, the jewelry box in her manicured hands. Gloria! I was just looking for those family photos you promised Derek. In my jewelry box? I asked calmly, though inside I was reeling. Lisa's perfectly made-up face hardened. Fine. Derek's in trouble and we need money. Those old trinkets were just sitting here while we might lose our house. So you took Betty's locket and Frank's medals, items with sentimental value but little monetary worth. The medals had gold content, and vintage jewelry sells well on certain websites. No one would trace it back to us. Iris stepped forward. We've called security. They're on their way with the police. Lisa's eyes darted around like a cornered animal's. You can't prove anything. It's your word against mine, and you're just confused old people. Herb held up his tablet, showing the video feed of Lisa going through my drawers. Actually, we can prove it. The color drained from Lisa's face. Then unexpectedly, she started to cry. Derek doesn't know. This was all me. He thinks I'm picking up extra money doing interior design consultations. I wanted to believe her, to think my son wasn't involved in stealing from his own mother and her friends, but something didn't add up. How did you get into our rooms? Frank demanded. Lisa wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara. I volunteer at the front desk sometimes, remember, for the Sunny Pines Auxiliary? I saw where they keep the master keys. It was true that Lisa occasionally volunteered, organizing holiday events and fundraisers. It had always seemed out of character for her, given her general disdain for the elderly. Now it made sense. It gave her access. Security arrived with Detective Wilson, who seemed unsurprised to see us involved in another case. As they led Lisa away, I felt hollow rather than triumphant. Back in Iris's room, our detective squad gathered to process what had happened. Do you think Derek really didn't know? Mabel asked gently. I want to believe that, I said. But they share finances. How could he not notice? Iris poured us each a small medicinal brandy she kept for emergencies. People are remarkably good at not seeing what they don't want to see, especially when it comes to loved ones. We were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Detective Wilson. Mrs. Patterson, he said with a grave expression, I need to speak with you privately. In the hallway, he showed me a photograph on his phone. Do you recognize this? It was my wedding ring. Where did you find this? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Not the ring, just the photo. Mrs. Henderson says she sold the actual ring months ago. To whom? Detective Wilson hesitated. That's where things get complicated. She claims she sold it to Director Bennett. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Our investigation had only scratched the surface of what was happening at Sunny Pines, and I had a sinking feeling that we were all in far more danger than we had realized.
The next 24 hours were a whirlwind. Detective Wilson asked us to keep the information about Director Bennett confidential while they investigated. Lisa was released on bail pending charges, and Derek called me in tears, alternating between apologies and insisting he knew nothing about his wife's activities. I wanted to believe him, but doubt had firmly taken root. How could he not have noticed the extra income or questioned where Lisa got the money for her expensive shopping habits? Our detective squad met in the garden, away from potential eavesdroppers. After relaying what Detective Wilson had told me, I shared my suspicions. If Bennett is involved, this could be much bigger than we thought, Iris said, her voice low. He has access to everything: resident files, medications, valuables inventory. Frank nodded grimly. Could explain why the staff dismissed our report so easily. They were under orders. But why target sentimental items, Mabel wondered. If they're running a theft ring, wouldn't they go for more valuable things? The sentimental items are perfect, Herb pointed out. They're not typically listed on insurance inventories, and most of us don't have detailed documentation for them. And if we report them missing, they can dismiss us as confused, I added bitterly. We decided to continue our investigation discreetly. Herb would monitor Bennett's comings and goings with his camera system. Mabel would review the visitor logs she had access to as the resident council secretary. Frank would map staff rotations and security blind spots. Iris would use her insurance contacts to look into Bennett's background. I had the most difficult task, acting normal whenever I encountered Bennett. The opportunity came sooner than expected. That evening, Bennett stopped me in the hallway, his smile as polished as ever. "Mrs. Patterson, I wanted to personally check on you after yesterday's excitement. Such a shame about your daughter-in-law." I forced myself to smile back. "Yes, quite a shock, but I'm glad we recovered some of the stolen items." "Not your ring, though, I understand." His eyes had a calculating gleam. "Such a shame. Family heirlooms are irreplaceable." "Indeed they are." I held his gaze steadily. "But I haven't given up hope of finding it." Something flashed across his face. Annoyance? Worry? It was gone too quickly to identify. "Well, don't get your hopes up too much," he said smoothly. "These things rarely turn up once they're gone." As he walked away, I felt a chill, despite the building's perpetually overheated corridors. There was something predatory in his manner that I'd never noticed before. The next morning, Iris called an emergency meeting in the garden. "My contact ran a background check on Bennett," she said without preamble. "He's worked at 5 different care facilities in the last decade. Each time, he left shortly after irregularities were discovered: missing medications, resident complaints about lost valuables, financial discrepancies." "Why wasn't this caught in his background check when Sunny Pines hired him?" Mabel asked. "The irregularities were always settled quietly. The facilities didn't want negative publicity, and Bennett never faced formal charges." "So he's been doing this for years," Frank growled, "preying on the elderly because we're easy targets." "Not this time," I said firmly. "This time, he picked the wrong seniors to mess with." We developed a plan to gather concrete evidence against Bennett. Herb would expand his camera network to cover Bennett's office and the medication room. Iris would create a fake valuable, a rare coin collection she would casually mention around staff. We would document everything meticulously. What we didn't plan for was Bennett making the first move. That night, I woke to the sound of someone in my room. Before I could reach for the light or call out, a hand clamped over my mouth. "Don't scream, Mrs. Patterson," Bennett's voice hissed in my ear. "We need to have a little chat about you and your friends playing detective." As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw the glint of something metallic in his other hand. With a jolt of terror, I realized it was a syringe. What happened next would prove that even at 79, with arthritis joints and a pacemaker, a determined woman should never be underestimated.
In that moment of terror, with Bennett looming over me and a syringe in his hand, I did something unexpected. I went completely limp and closed my eyes. "Mrs. Patterson," Bennett shook me roughly. When I didn't respond, he muttered a curse and checked my pulse. I focused on keeping my breathing shallow and my body unresponsive.
After a lifetime of dealing with unruly third graders as a school librarian, I'd perfected the art of playing possum when necessary. Great, Bennett grumbled. Just what I need, a medical emergency to explain. He released my mouth and stepped back. I heard him moving around my room, opening drawers. This was my chance. I slowly reached for the emergency call button that Herb had modified to also trigger his camera system. As my fingers found the button, Bennett turned back toward me. "Don't even think about it," he snapped. Too late. I'd already pressed it. Bennett lunged forward, grabbing my wrist painfully. "You stubborn old bat. I was just going to scare you into silence, but now you forced my hand." He raised the syringe, and I braced myself for whatever drug he planned to inject. But before he could bring it down, my door burst open. Framed in the doorway was Frank, wielding his aluminum walker like a battering ram. "Get away from her!" Frank bellowed with the full authority of his military days. Bennett whirled around, momentarily stunned by the interruption. That split second was all I needed. I grabbed the glass of water from my nightstand and flung it directly into his face. Bennett staggered backward, sputtering and wiping his eyes. Frank charged forward, ramming his walker into Bennett's legs and toppling him to the floor. The syringe skittered under the bed. Herb appeared next, moving faster than I'd ever seen him, with Mabel right behind. Herb had his tablet in hand, recording everything. "The police are on their way," Mabel announced, brandishing her phone. "Iris is watching the exits in case he tries to run." Bennett struggled to his feet, his composure completely gone. "You don't understand what you're doing. This goes higher than me. There are people who won't be happy about your interference." "Save it for the police," Frank said, positioning his walker to block the door. Bennett looked around wildly, then made a desperate lunge toward the window. But at his age, with his bad knee, Frank couldn't move quickly enough to stop him. It was Mabel who acted, swinging her heavy purse with surprising force. It caught Bennett squarely in the back of the head, sending him crashing into my dresser instead of the window. He slumped to the floor, dazed. By the time the police arrived, we had Bennett zip-tied to a chair using supplies from Herb's emergency kit. Detective Wilson took one look at the scene, 4 elderly residents standing guard over the trussed-up director, and shook his head in amazement. "You people should have your own TV show," as officers took Bennett into custody. The syringe, when tested, contained a lethal dose of insulin, enough to cause a fatal hypoglycemic reaction that would likely have been attributed to natural causes in someone my age. In the days that followed, the full extent of Bennett's operation came to light. He had been running a complex scheme at Sunny Pines and previous facilities, stealing medications to sell on the black market and pocketing valuable items from residents. Lisa was a small-time opportunist who inadvertently stumbled into his larger operation. More disturbingly, Bennett was connected to a network that specifically targeted senior care facilities nationwide. As he'd warned, it went higher than him. The FBI became involved, and several administrators at other facilities were arrested. As for my wedding ring, it was eventually recovered from a pawn shop in another state. The FBI agent who returned it to me had tears in his eyes as he explained that his own grandmother had been victimized in a similar scheme. He said that what you and your friends did has protected countless vulnerable seniors. You're heroes. I didn't feel like a hero. I was just a stubborn old woman who refused to be dismissed. The newspaper called us the Sunny Pines Sleuths. The story went viral online, and suddenly we were minor celebrities. A local TV station wanted to interview us, and a publisher reached out for a potential book deal. Through it all, our little detective squad remained grounded. We met for canasta in the sunroom just as before,
although now other residents would stop by to ask for help with their own mysteries, usually mundane things like missing reading glasses or misplaced letters, but we took each case seriously. Derek and I were working on rebuilding our relationship. He swore he knew nothing about Lisa's thefts, and eventually, I chose to believe him. Sometimes faith in family is a decision you make, even when doubt lingers. He filed for divorce and started attending therapy to understand how he'd been so blind to his wife's actions. What none of us expected was the letter that arrived for me 6 weeks after Bennett's arrest, a letter that would prove our detective days were far from over.
The letter came on expensive stationery, hand-delivered rather than sent through the mail. The Sunny Pines receptionist brought it to me during our weekly detective meeting in the sunroom. "This just came for you, Mrs. Patterson," she said. "The messenger said it was urgent." The envelope bore no return address, just my name in elegant handwriting. I opened it carefully, my arthritic fingers struggling with the heavy paper. Inside was a single sheet with a brief message. "Mrs. Patterson, your recent activities have attracted attention in certain circles. Your skills and those of your associates could be valuable to us. If you're interested in using your talents for more than finding missing reading glasses, meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m. at the Silver Spoon Cafe across from the park. M." "Well, that's certainly mysterious," Mabel said when I read it aloud. "And suspicious," Frank added, his bushy eyebrows furrowing. "Could be connected to Bennett's operation." Iris took the letter, examining the paper and handwriting. High-quality stationery, confident penmanship, someone educated and affluent. "Could be a trap," Herb suggested, adjusting his hearing aid. "Bennett had accomplices who weren't caught." "Or it could be someone who genuinely needs our help, someone who can't go through official channels." We debated whether I should go to the meeting. The FBI had warned us that some of Bennett's associates were still at large, but curiosity has always been my weakness. "I'll go," Iris volunteered. "I have self-defense training from my investigator days." "We'll all go," I decided. "Safety in numbers, but we'll be careful." The next day, we took Iris's car to the Silver Spoon Cafe, arriving 30 minutes early to scope out the location. The cafe was upscale, but not pretentious, with large windows overlooking the park and widely spaced tables that allowed for private conversations. We chose a corner table with a clear view of both the entrance and the emergency exit. Frank positioned his walker where he could reach it easily. Mabel kept her heavy purse on her lap. It had proven to be an effective weapon once before. Herb set up his modified hearing aid, which could record conversations. At exactly 2 p.m., a distinguished woman in her 60s entered the cafe. She wore a tailored suit and carried herself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to authority. Her silver hair was cut in a sleek bob, and her eyes missed nothing as they scanned the room and landed on our table. She approached us directly. "Mrs. Patterson?" "I'm Margaret Thornton. Thank you for coming." She sat down without waiting for an invitation. A waiter immediately appeared with trays of tea and pastries, suggesting this had been prearranged. "I believe introductions are in order," Margaret said, pouring tea with practiced grace. "I already know who you are, of course. Gloria Patterson, former school librarian. Iris Chen, insurance fraud investigator. Frank Kowalski, Korean War veteran. Mabel Washington, legal secretary. And Herbert Goldstein, locksmith." "You've done your homework," Iris said coolly. "Now perhaps you could tell us why we're here." Margaret smiled. "Direct. I appreciate that."
She took a sip of tea before continuing. I represent a private foundation that specializes in resolving certain sensitive matters, matters that require discretion, intelligence, and individuals who are often overlooked. You mean old people, Frank said bluntly. I mean experienced individuals with valuable skills who can move through the world unnoticed because society has decided they're no longer relevant. Margaret's eyes gleamed. Being underestimated is a powerful advantage in our line of work. And what line of work is that exactly? I asked. We solve problems that can't be addressed through conventional channels, sometimes for private clients, sometimes for government agencies that need plausible deniability. You're talking about some kind of senior citizen spy network, Mabel said, incredulously. Margaret chuckled. Nothing so dramatic. Think of us more as specialized consultants who happen to have a few extra decades of life experience. She opened her purse and removed a file folder. Your work on the Sunny Pines case was impressive. Not just the resolution, but your methodology. You worked with limited resources, leveraged your specific skills, and succeeded where trained professionals had failed. We got lucky, I said modestly. Luck favors the prepared mind, Margaret countered, and your minds are clearly still sharp. She slid the folder toward me. This is a small case, a test, if you will. A valuable painting has gone missing from a private collection. The owner can't go to the police because the painting was never officially documented for tax reasons. Sounds illegal, Frank said flatly. Merely a gray area, Margaret replied smoothly. The painting itself is legitimate, and the owner is the rightful possessor. They simply want it recovered discreetly. I glanced at my friends. Iris looked intrigued, Frank suspicious, Mabel curious, and Herb was leaning forward to ensure he caught every word. Why us? I asked. Surely you have professionals for such a thing. The suspected thief is residing at Peaceful Pines Retirement Community, someone your age group could infiltrate without raising suspicions. My eyebrows shot up. Peaceful Pines? That's our rival facility across town. Indeed, the suspected thief is a new resident named Arthur Wellington, former art dealer, recently moved in after his wife's death. The painting disappeared from the owner's home after Wellington appraised their collection. The file contained photos of the painting, a small landscape, and Wellington himself, an elegant man in his late 70s. What would this consulting involve exactly? Iris asked. Full expenses paid for all of you to visit Peaceful Pines as potential new residents. You'd have 2 weeks to locate the painting and gather evidence of Wellington's guilt. The foundation would handle recovery once you've confirmed its location. Your compensation would be substantial. And if we're not interested, Frank challenged. Margaret smiled. Then you finish your tea, decline politely, and return to finding lost dentures at Sunny Pines. No pressure. She stood to leave. Take 24 hours to decide. If you're interested, simply call the number on the back of my card. After she left, we sat in stunned silence until Herb finally spoke. Well, he said, his eyes twinkling behind his thick glasses, it seems our reputation precedes us. Mabel lifted her teacup. To the Sunny Pine Sleuth, it appears we may be back in business. What began as a simple investigation into stolen jewelry had evolved into something none of us could have imagined. At our age, most people expected us to quietly fade away. Instead, we were being recruited for what amounted to geriatric espionage. Life, it seemed, still had surprises in store for us. And despite the potential dangers, I couldn't remember feeling this alive in years.
We spent that evening debating Margaret Thornton's offer. Frank was the most skeptical, citing his military experience with covert operations gone wrong. Iris was intrigued by the challenge and the chance to use her investigative skills again. Mabel worried about the legality, but admitted she was bored with the routine at Sunny Pines. Herb was already designing new surveillance gadgets, clearly on board. As for me, I kept thinking about what Margaret had said about being underestimated. All my life, I'd played by the rules. I was the reliable school librarian, the supportive wife, the devoted mother. Now, in my late 70s, I was being offered the chance to be something else entirely, a secret agent of sorts. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. "What if this is connected to Bennett's operation?" Frank asked during our discussion. "It could be a trap." "I checked Margaret Thornton's credentials," Iris replied. "She's legitimate. Former FBI, now runs a private security firm with government contracts." "The painting recovery itself sounds simple enough," Mabel noted. "We're just gathering information, not stealing anything ourselves." Herb adjusted his hearing aid. "And let's be honest, we're all bored out of our minds most days. This would be exciting." "It could also be dangerous," I reminded them. "We're not exactly in our physical prime." "Speak for yourself," Frank said, flexing his arm to show a surprisingly firm bicep. "I still do push-ups every morning." In the end, we took a vote. It was unanimous. The Sunny Pine sleuths would accept Margaret's mission. The next day, I called the number on her card. Within hours, we had received detailed briefing packages about Arthur Wellington and Peaceful Pines. Within a week, we were registered for a prospective residence tour at our rival retirement facility. Peaceful Pines was everything Sunny Pines wasn't. Luxurious, meticulously maintained, with amenities that made our facility look like a budget motel. The lobby featured a baby grand piano and fresh flower arrangements. The dining room offered made-to-order meals rather than cafeteria-style service. Even the staff uniforms looked more elegant. "No wonder this Wellington character chose to live here," Herb whispered as we were led through the common areas. "Perfect cover for a high-end art thief." Our tour guide, a perky young woman named Ashley, showed us the library, game room, and garden, all while extolling the virtues of active senior living. We tried to appear appropriately impressed while secretly scanning for signs of Wellington. We got our break during the lunch portion of the tour. Ashley seated us in the dining room, where residents were enjoying what appeared to be restaurant-quality meals. "There he is," Iris murmured, nodding subtly toward a corner table. Arthur Wellington sat alone, reading a leather-bound book while he ate. He fit the photo in our briefing package, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a cashmere sweater and pressed slacks, with the bearing of someone accustomed to fine things. "How do we approach him?" Mabel wondered. Before we could formulate a plan, Wellington himself provided the opportunity. As he rose to leave, he dropped his napkin. I was closest to his table and immediately seized the chance. "Excuse me, sir," I called, picking up the napkin. "You dropped this." Wellington turned, his blue eyes sharp and assessing, despite his age. "How kind of you," he said, his voice cultured with a hint of British accent. "Are you new residents?" "Just touring," I replied with my best grandmotherly smile. "I'm Gloria Patterson." "Arthur Wellington." He shook my hand firmly. "If you have questions about living here from a resident's perspective, I'd be happy to share my experiences. The staff presentation is always a bit rehearsed." "That would be wonderful," I said, ignoring Ashley's slight frown. "My friends and I are considering several facilities." Wellington glanced at our group. "Why don't you join me for coffee in the conservation after your tour? Say 3 o'clock?
The staff serves proper pastries then, not the diet-friendly substitutes they're forced to promote during official functions. We'd be delighted, I said, feeling a flutter of excitement. Phase 1 of infiltration complete. The rest of the tour dragged on as Ashley showed us apartment options and explained the pricing structure. Finally, at 3 o'clock, we made our way to the conservatory, a stunning glass-enclosed garden room filled with tropical plants and comfortable seating arrangements. Wellington was waiting, having secured a private corner with a coffee service and a plate of French pastries. As we approached, I noticed he had set out extra cups, suggesting he'd arranged this service in advance. "Welcome to the real Peaceful Pines," he said with a conspiratorial smile, "the part they don't show on the official tour." Over the next hour, Wellington proved to be a charming host and a font of information about the facility. He explained which staff members could be trusted, which activities were worth attending, and which residents to avoid if you valued intelligent conversation. "The Bridge Club is particularly cutthroat," he warned. "Mrs. Whitaker was a champion player in the 1980s and has not mellowed with age." Throughout our conversation, I looked for openings to discuss art or his former career, but Wellington skillfully kept the focus on us, our backgrounds, our reasons for considering Peaceful Pines, our interests and hobbies. It wasn't until Herb mentioned his interest in collecting that Wellington's demeanor subtly shifted. "What do you collect, Mr. Goldstein?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes suddenly more focused. "Oh, this and that," Herb replied vaguely. "Mostly watches and small mechanical items, but I've always appreciated fine art, though I could never afford the pieces I truly admired." Wellington nodded, a flicker of interest crossing his face. "Art appreciation doesn't require ownership," he said. "Some of the world's greatest masterpieces can only be viewed in museums, after all." "Though private collections often hold the most interesting pieces," Iris added, "those that rarely see public display." "Indeed," Wellington agreed. "I specialized in connecting such pieces with discerning collectors during my career." Finally, an opening. You were an art dealer?" I asked innocently. "For over 40 years, he confirmed. Retired now, of course, though I occasionally consult for former clients." The conversation continued, with Wellington gradually revealing more about his expertise and career. By the time we left Peaceful Pines, we had established a rapport and secured an invitation to return for the facility's upcoming art exhibition, an event Wellington was helping to organize. "A perfect opportunity," Iris said as we drove back to Sunny Pines. "We'll have legitimate access to his social circle and possibly his apartment if he hosts any pre-event gatherings." "He's careful," Frank noted, kept turning the conversation back to us whenever we got too close to his current activities. "But he's also lonely," Mabel observed. "Did you notice how he lingered over coffee, found reasons to extend our visit? His wife died recently, and he's in a new environment. He's vulnerable to the prospect of friendship, which we're going to exploit," I said, feeling a twinge of guilt. "He's a thief, Gloria," Iris reminded me gently. "If he took that painting, he betrayed someone's trust for his own gain." I nodded, pushing aside my misgivings. This was our mission, and we would see it through. The Sunny Pines sleuths were officially on the case. What I couldn't have known then was that Arthur Wellington was far more than a lonely art thief, and the painting was merely a small piece in a much larger puzzle, one that would put all our lives at risk and test the limits of our unusual new partnership with Margaret Thornton. But for now, as we planned our next move, I felt that same exhilarating sense of purpose I'd experienced when investigating the thefts at Sunny Pines. At 79, when most people had written me off as just another old woman waiting out her final years, I was embarking on the most exciting chapter of my life. and I couldn't wait to turn the page.